Most men believe they are free because they can move, speak, and choose small daily pleasures. But freedom is not movement, it is direction. The weak mind confuses autonomy with routine, as if repeating habits were proof of control. Machiavelli understood that a man who believes he is free is easier to govern than one who recognizes his chains. True slavery does not need walls. It happens when your choices are shaped by fears you refuse to admit and desires you never question. The modern man follows impulses as if they were rational decisions, unaware that each thought was born from an external influence. He lives reacting to invisible pressures and calls this reaction his own will. The ordinary man does not realize that his behavior was predicted before he even acted. He consumes what was designed to attract him, speaks like the group he fears losing, and thinks within the limits someone else has set for him. Whoever controls the environment does not need to control the individual. It is enough to control what he is capable of imagining. Machiavelli described this mechanism by showing that the best way to govern is to give people the feeling of choice. The governed man believes he decided when in reality he only selected one of the options placed in front of him. The weak man lives like this, choosing pre-approved paths while believing he made a sovereign decision. He does not see that freedom without awareness is only obedience in disguise. This illusion also appears in the way men seek approval. He adjusts his words to please, changes his posture to be accepted, and reshapes his values to avoid conflict. With every concession, he surrenders another part of his autonomy. He believes he is being smart, but he is only negotiating his freedom in exchange for social comfort. The weak mind always trades power for belonging. Mental slavery also appears in how he reacts to his emotions. A man who does not control himself is dragged by anger, desire, anxiety, and pride. He raises his voice when he should observe, stays silent when he should set boundaries, and apologizes when he should simply hold his position. No one is free when their responses are automatic. He is only a body obeying internal commands he never learned to discipline. The final illusion appears when a man believes he knows himself. He repeats ideas about authenticity, but never investigates the source of his impulses. He defends an identity built from random experiences, misunderstood traumas, and the expectations of others. He calls this self, but it is only a set of conditioned responses. His freedom is a comfortable myth. And here is the truth few can handle. You have never been free because you never questioned who actually operates your choices. There has always been an invisible hand guiding your attention, your emotions, your narrative, and your need to be seen. The strongest chain is the one you do not recognize. When was the last time you made a decision that did not come from fear, habit, or the desire to be accepted? Machiavelli understood that a man moves for only two reasons: what he fears losing and what he needs to gain. Whoever controls these two forces controls the entire man. The weak mind believes it is complex, but it is predictable. It chases what it desires and runs from what frightens it, never noticing that someone else decided the distance between both. The law of need operates quietly. All it takes is making a man believe he depends on something, and he becomes tamed. It can be approval, stability, a relationship, a salary, a routine. Once need settles in, power shifts hands. He begins trading his dignity for emotional scraps, afraid of losing the little he receives. And no man who fears loss truly owns himself. Those who understand the game distribute needs the way others distribute chains. They create emotional dependence through calculated praise, financial dependence through intermittent rewards, and psychological dependence by offering small doses of validation. This is how someone is kept loyal without force. Give the minimum and make that minimum feel essential. The weak call it connection. The strategist calls it control. The law of fear completes the structure. Machiavelli said fear is more reliable than love because it requires no maintenance. A man fears judgment, rejection, failure, exposure. Because of this, he avoids confrontations that would return authority to him, gives up ground he should protect, and silences truths that could free him. He doesn't realize each fear is an invisible leash pulled by hands he cannot see. Those who rule through fear don't need to shout. They only suggest consequences. The possibility of disapproval already forces submission. The threat of loss already disciplines. The weak man learns to obey before being commanded. He acts preemptively, stepping back from his own power to avoid disturbing the environment. And so the one who controls him doesn't even need to appear. The combination of need and fear forms the perfect prison. The individual believes he is making decisions, but he is only avoiding discomfort and preserving dependencies. He thinks he chose a path when in reality he followed the one that threatened his fragility the least. The weak mind always prefers comfortable safety over real freedom, because freedom demands responsibility, and responsibility demands courage. From this, a pattern becomes obvious. Whoever controls what you need controls your behavior. Whoever controls what you fear controls your identity. And if someone controls both, you are nothing more than a piece operated by internal pressures you don't even recognize as external. Mental slavery doesn't begin when someone dominates you, but when you become accustomed to being dominated. Look at your life for a moment. How many of your decisions were conscious choices, and how many were reactions to the fear of losing or the need to receive? Machiavelli understood that a man who wants to be loved becomes predictable. The law of approval turns a weak mind into a voluntary servant. He adjusts his identity according to whoever stands in front of him, modifying his tone of voice, posture, and opinions to avoid friction. He doesn't realize that every concession makes him more malleable, and that this malleability condemns him to irrelevance. A man who wants to please forgets to exist. The pursuit of approval works like an addiction. Every gesture of validation provides a small psychological relief, and the individual gradually becomes dependent on it without noticing. The weak mind begins to measure its worth by other people's reactions instead of its own conduct. As a result, any rejection becomes a threat, any neutral look becomes judgment, and any silence becomes a sentence. Someone who lives like this doesn't act, he reacts. And once reaction dominates, power disappears. Approval turns into a marketplace, and the weak man sells himself cheaply. He says yes when he should set boundaries, steps back when he should stand firm, and compliments when he should simply observe. Every action comes from the anxiety of being accepted, not from the conviction of being solid. A man who seeks to be liked loses authority before he even speaks, because submission is already written on his face. The law of emotion reward deepens this enslavement. The weak man learns to associate personal value with small doses of attention, affection, or recognition. He conditions himself like an animal pressing the same lever in hopes of the same stimulus. This creates a cycle of dependency. Emotion triggers action. Action seeks reward. Reward reinforces the emotion. He becomes a puppet to his own impulses, obeying pleasure as if it were purpose. Whoever dominates this man doesn't need to manipulate him directly. It's enough to control the rhythm of the rewards. Move closer to validate him. Pull away to create anxiety, then return to offer relief. This is how emotional attachment, silent submission, and irrational loyalty are produced. The weak man becomes imprisoned not by force, but by the desire to repeat the sensation that comforts him. And any desire that repeats endlessly doesn't belong to the individual. It belongs to the one who controls it. Emotional dependency also shows itself in the need for immediate responses. The weak mind cannot tolerate silence because silence exposes its insecurity. It insists on explanations, justifications, and reassurances, trying to relieve its own inner tension. In doing so, it gives away too much information, speaks when it should wait, and exposes itself when it should observe. Urgency reveals vulnerability. Whoever cannot control time cannot control anything. The central point is simple and brutal. A man who needs approval is always at the mercy of anyone who can withhold it. And a man who depends emotionally on rewards becomes a servant to whoever controls the flow of those rewards. Enslavement doesn't begin when someone captures you, but when you desperately want to please the jailer. Now ask yourself, how many of your relationships are actual choices, and how many are just reactions to the fear of losing the emotional dose that keeps you calm? Every man stands before an invisible court, not a court of kings, but of silent observers who judge every gesture, every word, and every exposed weakness. The law of the invisible court shows that whoever fears this judgment gives up power before being evaluated. A weak mind constantly tries to predict the opinion of others, shaping its behavior to avoid criticism and turning itself into a character designed to please imaginary audiences. In doing so, it loses substance while trying to preserve appearance. This invisible court doesn't need to exist in reality, it only needs to exist in a man's mind. He behaves as if everyone is watching, measuring, evaluating, and commenting on every detail of his life. This creates a constant state of internal surveillance, where his actions do not come from intention, but from anticipation. Regardless of what he does, he acts based on what he thinks others will think. A man who behaves under perpetual observation will never be free. What is most revealing, and what Machiavelli already understood, is that this court rarely pays attention. People are consumed by their own conflicts and insecurities, but the weak mind insists on believing it is the center of the world's judgment. This illusion weakens him. It makes his posture unstable, his presence anxious, and his speech reactive. And when someone actually observes him, they see only exposed fragility and implicit need. The law of image appears as a mechanism that replaces essence with perception. The weak man sees image as a mask and uses it excessively, trying to impress through grand gestures, hastily formed opinions, and forced displays of courage. He confuses presence with noise, strength with aggression, and respect with fear. In trying to look powerful, he exposes himself as insecure. Image only dominates when it is subtle. The strategist sees image as a tool, not an identity. He controls what he shows and, more importantly, what he withholds. He knows that revealing intentions weakens him, exposing emotions compromises him, and justifying action signals insecurity. His image is built through silence, restraint, and calculated predictability. He lets others fill in the empty spaces, knowing that their imagination will create a stronger version of him than any explanation could. The weak mind, in contrast, tries to explain itself too much. It justifies every move, tries to clarify every intention, and attempts to align perceptions to avoid being misunderstood. This excess of transparency destroys mystery, and without mystery, there is no power. The one who talks too much provides material to be deciphered. The one who shows too much offers targets. The one who tries to control others' opinions reveals dependence on them. The invisible court and the game of image form a tightening loop. The more a man tries to please the court, the more he harms his image. The more he tries to control his image, the more he submits to the court. The result is a life built to satisfy external expectations, not internal convictions. There is no freedom when your dignity depends on the eyes that watch you. So the inevitable question appears: do you act with your own intention? Or do you merely perform for an audience that exists only in your mind? No modern prison needs bars when a man's attention is already scattered. The law of the algorithm of chaos shows that the weak mind lives fragmented, jumping between superficial stimuli that drain its discipline and dissolve its identity. He believes he is informed, connected, updated. In reality, he is simply too busy to notice that he can no longer sustain a single thought without losing himself along the way. Distraction does not dominate him through force, but through volume. The excess of stimuli creates constant noise that prevents mental silence, and without silence there is no strategy. The weak mind reacts to notifications as if they were commands, answers messages as if they were obligations, and consumes content as if every crumb were essential. He confuses movement with progress, speed with direction, and urgency with importance. As a result, he lives exhausted and at the same time unproductive. Machiavelli would say that the ruler who controls the circulation of information controls the behavior of the people. Today, that role does not belong to a sovereign, but to systems that manipulate attention through predictable patterns. They learn what triggers your anger, your desire, your curiosity, and use that knowledge to keep you confined. They do not need to censor you, they only need to overwhelm you. The weak mind cannot resist excess because it never learned restraint. The problem is not distraction itself, but what it destroys. Distraction eliminates focus, and focus is the root of power. Without focus, your words lose weight, your presence loses force, and your capacity for action dissolves. A man who cannot maintain concentration cannot maintain authority. He becomes a servant of the next stimulus, obeying impulses he never chose and frustrated by outcomes he never understood. Distraction also kills productive discomfort, that sensation that precedes growth. Every time the weak mind feels boredom, anxiety, or deep reflection approaching, it runs toward quick relief. It opens a screen, seeks an opinion, looks for immediate pleasure. In doing so, it never confronts itself, never revises its posture, never notices the patterns that imprison it. Constant escape guarantees that it remains shallow, predictable, and easy to dominate. The most dangerous part is that the distracted man believes he is in control. He sees himself as multitasking, flexible, adaptable. He does not realize that his inability to sustain silence exposes psychological fragility. The strong mind chooses what enters. The weak one accepts everything. Whoever does not control his own attention controls neither thought, nor behavior, nor destiny. Modern slavery is a continuous flow of stimuli that keeps him docile, tired, and too distracted to react. External chaos only dominates those who are already fragmented internally. That is why the question is direct and uncomfortable. Do you still choose where your attention goes? Or has it already been seized by the first stimulus that demands your reaction? The law of the tyranny of impulse reveals what Machiavelli always understood. A man who does not control his emotions is easily governed by the emotions of others. The weak mind believes that acting from the heart is authenticity, when in reality it is only a lack of discipline. He reacts without thinking, explodes without strategy, yields without awareness. Every impulse becomes a command, and he obeys as if obedience were natural. No tyrant needs to dominate this man. He already mismanages himself enough to be useful to any manipulator. When uncontrolled, anger turns a man into a weapon aimed by invisible hands. A minor humiliation, a hint of disrespect, or an uncomfortable truth is enough to make the weak man predictable. He tries to impose himself through the intensity of the moment instead of the coldness of intention. He shouts to compensate for insecurity, insists to mask fear, steps forward to hide fragility. In doing so, he loses the battle before even understanding the board. The man who governs his anger does not react. He simply watches the others surrender. Desire operates with the same efficiency. The weak mind confuses desire with direction and ends up chasing what seduces him rather than what strengthens him. He is captivated by female attention, easy compliments, and opportunities that promise quick pleasure. He overexposes himself, reveals his intentions too early, and compromises his posture to secure emotional crumbs. Desire leads him like an invisible leash because he has never learned to say no to his own impulses. He believes he is living intensely, when in truth he becomes too accessible, too predictable, too easy to manipulate. This is why impulsiveness and vulnerability walk together. A man who reacts without thinking exposes his weakness before being tested. His emotions lie on the surface, and anyone observing learns precisely which buttons to press. One accusation irritates him. One compliment melts him. One silence unsettles him. One criticism weakens him. There is no freedom when anyone can control your behavior with small doses of emotional stimulus. The tyranny is not in the other. It is in what lives inside him. Impulse also destroys social ground. The weak man does not understand that presence matters more than speech, and action more than intention. He tries to resolve everything immediately, as if speed proved strength. In truth, it reveals desperation. He replies to messages too quickly, explains himself too early, commits before evaluating. Urgency is the language of someone who fears losing, and the one who fears losing has already lost. Power requires time, restraint, and coldness. 3 elements the impulsive man does not know. What Machiavelli implied is straightforward. The man ruled by emotions is malleable material. He does not choose paths, he chooses relief. He does not make decisions, he interrupts discomforts. He does not act out of conviction, he acts out of escape. His life becomes a sequence of automatic responses to whatever stimuli the world throws at him. There is no conquest when every action is merely a reaction. So consider this with brutal honesty. Do your decisions come from your reason? Or are you simply running after the first impulse that promises to quiet the feeling you fear facing? The law of naive honesty exposes a weakness the modern man still refuses to see. He believes that being transparent makes him noble, when in reality it makes him predictable. The weak mind confuses sincerity with needless exposure, as if revealing his inner world were a sign of courage. Machiavelli never treated truth as a virtue in itself. He treated it as a tool, and any tool used at the wrong moment becomes a weapon turned against its owner. A man who talks too much gives away his roots, fears, intentions, and limits. He exposes himself emotionally expecting understanding, but what he gets is mapping. Every outburst shows where he breaks. Every confession shows where he bends. Every personal detail reveals which pressure will destabilize him. He thinks he is building connection, but he is only offering ammunition. The silent observer learns exactly how to guide him without resistance, using his own truths against him. Society encourages this naivete by romanticizing vulnerability as a sign of authenticity. But vulnerability without strategy is concession. There is no power in revealing scars to those who have not earned the right to see them. The weak mind uses this narrative to justify emotional impulsiveness. It tells everything, explains too much, shares too fast. This creates unbalanced relationships where he always gives more than he receives, and then feels surprised when he is manipulated with the information he offered freely. Naive transparency also destroys authority. A man who explains himself too much appears insecure. A man who constantly justifies himself appears guilty. A man who reveals everything he thinks loses weight because there is no mystery, no depth, no strategic distance. He becomes ordinary, and the ordinary never commands respect. Machiavelli understood that a ruler must hide more than he shows, not out of malice, but out of prudence. Only those who control information, including their own, retain power. The weak mind, however, treats honesty as a moral obligation. It feels guilt for withholding thoughts, as if silence were a sin. That guilt is what drives it to open up in front of people who have no intention of protecting it. It hands over its inner world hoping for acceptance, and receives control disguised as care. The deepest emotional slavery begins when you believe you owe explanations to someone who has no authority over your life. The problem is not telling the truth, it is telling everything. Truth does not need to be complete to be real. What is withheld protects more than what is spoken. Restraint builds respect, reserve builds presence, and control of one's own narrative builds power. The one who controls what he reveals controls the game. The one who reveals everything becomes a background character in his own story, always reacting to the consequences of his excessive openness. Naive honesty is the most comfortable prison because it looks like virtue. But virtue without awareness is weakness. So confront the question with cold clarity. When you open your mouth to be honest, are you truly informing, or simply handing the world the perfect tools to bend you? The law of silence is one of the oldest weapons of power. The weak mind fears the space between words because it exposes its own insecurities. The strategist understands that silence is not absence, it is concentrated presence. When a man masters silence, he reshapes the hierarchy around him. He does not compete for space, he grants it, and the one who grants space displays sovereignty. Machiavelli knew that excessive speech signals urgency, while calculated silence reveals authority. Silence also works as a mirror. When you remain quiet, the other person talks too much. They try to fill the discomfort, try to prove something, try to interpret your stillness. In doing so, they expose intentions, weaknesses, and anxieties they would never reveal to someone who is desperate to respond. The weak mind reveals itself while trying to decipher you. Power emerges not through intimidation, but through observation. Whoever controls the rhythm of the conversation controls the ground on which it happens. The law of silence also protects your emotional center. A silent man does not react impulsively, does not expose his position, and does not allow the environment to mold him. He measures before answering, and sometimes he doesn't answer at all. This disciplined unpredictability unsettles others because there is no pattern to exploit. The weak mind seeks predictability. The strong mind offers opacity. Mystery is not theatrics, it is restraint, and restraint is a form of dominion. The law of distance completes the mechanism. Distance is not physical separation, but psychological space. The weak mind blends into the environment, absorbs other people's emotions, and loses itself in social dynamics. It wants to be liked, remembered, validated. This excessive closeness makes it vulnerable. When someone has easy access to your energy, they have easy access to your balance. Distance is a filter. Only those who deserve it pass through. Distance creates value. Anything rare becomes respected. Anything overly accessible becomes disposable. A man who maintains distance is not hiding. He is establishing hierarchy. He doesn't offer himself. He allows access. He doesn't ask for attention. He receives it. He doesn't fight for space. Space is granted to him. Machiavelli understood that a ruler must be visible enough to be remembered, but distant enough to be feared. Closeness erodes authority. Distance also produces mental clarity. When you stop reacting instantly to every stimulus, every message, every provocation, you regain control of time. The weak mind acts the moment it is touched. The strong mind observes before touching the world. This strategic pause eliminates unnecessary conflicts. preserves energy, and shields you from being manipulated by someone else's anxiety. Distance protects, organizes, and strengthens. When silence and distance work together, a man becomes impenetrable. He speaks little, but every word carries weight. He appears rarely, but every appearance matters. He involves himself sparingly, but every decision shifts the environment. The weak mind cannot understand this dynamic and tries to compensate with noise, excessive presence, and endless explanations. The more it speaks, the less it exists. Now examine your own conduct with brutal honesty. Do you control how much of yourself the world receives, or has the world been consuming you without permission? The law of self-deception is the final shackle, the most discreet, the most durable, and the most comfortable. Machiavelli understood that a man can only be governed from the outside when he is already defeated within, and nothing defeats him more than the lie he repeats to himself to stay emotionally stable. The weak mind creates convenient versions of itself to avoid the pain of seeing its own impotence. It protects the ego and sacrifices freedom. Self-deception begins when a man chooses a comforting narrative over an accurate diagnosis. He claims to be patient when he simply fears confrontation. He says he is loving when he is merely dependent. He calls impulsiveness passion, cowardice prudence, and procrastination perfectionism. Each internal lie becomes an emotional cushion that prevents him from feeling the real impact of his weakness. And what is softened is never corrected. The problem is that the internal lie does not stay confined to the mind. It shapes behavior. The self-deceived man does not see his own patterns. He repeats mistakes as if they were accidents and builds elaborate justifications to cover mediocre choices. He convinces himself he was treated unfairly when he simply failed to set boundaries. He believes he was deceived when he ignored obvious signs. He thinks he was betrayed when he gave trust too soon. Self-deception always creates a story where he is the victim, and the victim never takes control. This mechanism is useful for anyone who wants to manipulate him. A man who lives in self-deception is predictable. He will always seek emotional comfort, never strategic truth. He prefers praise over critique, fantasy over clarity, hope over responsibility. Machiavelli knew that a ruler should allow the people to believe in their own illusions, because illusions maintain order without the need for force. The same applies to personal relationships. Simply avoid confronting the weak man's narrative, and he will remain locked inside his own imaginary world. Self-deception also destroys the perception of strength. A man who lies to himself creates impossible goals and then punishes himself for not achieving them. He does not see that he failed not from incapacity but from denying his own reality. He demands discipline without first building consistency. He demands respect without cultivating posture. He demands freedom without facing his own shadows. The internal lie makes him desire the top without climbing the steps, and that keeps him permanently below. The cruelest part of this law is simple. No one can free a man who protects his own prison. Self-deception is too comfortable to be questioned without pain, and pain is what the weak mind fears most. So it prefers to distort the mirror rather than face its own reflection. It prefers to blame the world rather than admit its own negligence. It prefers to invent explanations instead of accepting that inner mastery never began. This is why the final question in this cycle is cold, direct, and unavoidable. Are you actually living your life, or living the story you created to avoid facing the truth about who you really are? A weak mind believes that freedom is something achieved on the outside, but Machiavelli understood that no man rules the world before he rules himself. Breaking the machine isn't rebellion against the system, it's rebellion against your own predictability. The imperturbable man emerges when he cuts the invisible wires that move his emotions, habits, and impulses. He doesn't act out of reaction, he acts out of intention, and that silent intention is what reshapes his position in the human hierarchy. The first step is simple but brutal, recognizing your own programming. You control nothing while you deny your patterns. The imperturbable man studies the roots of his behavior the same way a general studies the terrain before a war. He identifies where he gives in, where he is irritated, where he seeks approval, and where he escapes discomfort. There is no judgment or guilt, only diagnosis. The weak mind tries to change without understanding. The strong mind understands before deciding what must die. Then comes the discipline of micro-victories. The imperturbable man doesn't try to transform his entire life at once. He controls moments. He controls a reaction, a look, a delayed response, a contained emotion. He learns to value the pause between feeling and acting, because that pause is where power is born. Mastering that fraction of a second puts him far ahead of the impulsive man. Strength isn't in the explosion, but in the restraint that precedes any strategic move. Next, he organizes his attention as a sacred resource. Nothing enters without permission, and nothing stays without purpose. He decides what he consumes, what he ignores, and what deserves his energy. The weak mind is distracted by any sparkle. The strong mind creates filters. A man who controls his attention controls his reality. And a man who controls his reality becomes unreachable by the manipulations that shape those who live numbed by constant stimulation. Building imperturbability also requires the art of distance. Not emotional distance out of weakness, but distance out of sovereignty. The strong man doesn't engage where there is no purpose, doesn't explain himself where there is no authority, and doesn't give himself where there is no reciprocity. He understands that energy is capital and presence is investment. Every relationship is measured by exchange, not by neediness. Distance protects him from draining ties and from expectations that become prisons. Silence is the final layer of the process. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of observation. The imperturbable man speaks little because he thinks deeply. He reacts little because he anticipates much. He doesn't try to convince, impress, or compete for space. His strength comes from austerity. Where the weak try to prove value, the strong simply exist. His calm unsettles, his consistency intimidates, and his neutrality exposes others' weaknesses without raising his voice. When all these elements converge, a rare figure appears, the man who cannot be manipulated by fear, conquered by praise, or destabilized by chaos. The man who asks for nothing because he is already whole. The man who doesn't react because he chooses every move. The man who no longer seeks freedom because he finally embodies it. The final question isn't what you want to become, but what you are willing to abandon. The imperturbable man is not built by adding strength, but by removing everything that kept him vulnerable. Who do you need to stop being in order to finally be free?